You're listening to the Toolstation Western League podcast with Ian Knockholds and Tom Hiscott.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 31 of the Toolstation Western League podcast with me, Ian Knockholds, and I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Tom Hiscott, the editor of the Bulletin. Hello, Tom. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Just about keeping in there at the moment. Yourself?
I'm all right. Are you still doing the Joe Wicks PE workout?
I have been, yeah. Nice to have the weekend off because my thighs were absolutely burning. So, and other parts and another body parts that I haven't used in goodness knows how long. So yeah, I'm still trooping along with that. Half an hour a day. It's not bad.
No, it is. It's good, isn't it? I mean, I'm religiously addicted to it. I think it's good. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that I follow him to the letter. No. But I mean, my children have given it. I think they gave up on Thursday of last week. Really, they just sort of float around the room whilst I'm doing all my lunges and all that sort of business. But no, it is a very good way to spend half an hour a day. And I do believe I'm reliably informed that our league's social media manager, Mr. James Healy, has also been doing it, albeit that he suffered the same fate as you, I'm afraid. And I think he decided, I think certainly initially, to give it up, as it was causing him to walk like John Wayne.
Oh gosh.
I am reliably informed.
I've not reached that stage yet, but I'm expecting it.
The fact that I was having difficulty walking around afterwards, I put down to my appalling latent level of fitness. But I think perhaps I probably need to warm down. Anyway, on a footballing note, though, I have to say that the Football Association they've been sending out little workouts, sort of drills, training drills on their Twitter feed, which I have been taking my girls over the local park with a football. So I was gonna give them a go this week, and I shall come back to you next week and let you know if they're any good.
That's what I want to hear about that, yeah.
Good. Right then. Well, so on this week's episode of the Toolstation Western League podcast, we have another interview with John Paul, our league chairman. Now, of course, last week when I spoke to John, the situation about our league was up in the air. That situation has now been resolved, of course, and we know that at the moment the 2019-2020 season has been declared void, and we will go again at the beginning of 2020-2021. That's the plan, and I'm going to get John's reaction to that on this week's podcast. And then after we've spoken to the league chairman, we'll speak to a club chairman, Mr. Greg Coulson. The chairman of Westbury United will be telling us what that decision to void the season means to his club. But before we get into any of that, following on from our discussion last week, Tom, I'm going to introduce a feature that I like to call Tom Hiscott's Self-Isolation Nation. This is your opportunity to tell the listeners what you've been watching on TV this week. Over to you, Tom.
I'm excited about this. So I'm not doing much else. So yeah, it's plenty to be watched and what have you. So yeah, I suppose I'll pick out the highlights really. I don't want to go through absolutely everything, but so Saturday afternoon, usually obviously keeping up on the football and whatnot. BBC had I'm not going to say a genius idea. It's something that's popping up quite a lot over the last couple of days, obviously. TV companies and whatnot filling their spots. But on the red button on Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock kickoff, they showed a rerun of England-Croatia from Euro 2004, which is one of my, I'd say, yeah, I must have been about 11 at the time originally. So vague memories of that clash. And I mean, just looking at our lineup, you can see why they were called the Golden Generation. You had Rooney, Owen, Gerrard, Scholes, Lampard, Beckham, Neville, Campbell, Terry, Ashley Cole, and then David James as well, just for good measure, but all cobbled into the same 11. Pretty remarkable. Shame they never won anything, but yeah, 4-2 win over Croatia. It was good to reminisce. So that was a highlight of the week, I'd say. Saturday afternoon, getting a bit of football in. 2
Pompey legends in there as well, Tom.
Absolutely, it's good to tick them off, eh? Other football stuff on Netflix. I caught up with something I should have watched in the past, Sunderland Till I Die, which is a sort of one of those behind-the-scenes documentaries with players and staff and what have you. But there's a new series coming out on Wednesday, I believe, on Netflix, which looks back at last season. So I was catching up on the original series, which saw them relegated from the Championship after they'd just been relegated from the Premier League. So obviously it was a bit doom and gloom, but that was a good insight into how a club works. And there was quite a lot of stuff I'd sort of forgotten about, like who their managers were and stuff like that. And you sort of think, gosh, yeah. But that was pretty decent. So looking forward to the second series of that, and I'll probably update us next week or whatever when we next speak.
Yeah, don't forget the old the cup final. What was it?
Oh yeah, of course,
the Checker trade, because that was. Yeah. I'm sure they'll be really upset about that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think a good day for the club, but not good. Yeah, not on the pitch, but I think it was maybe looking back at good times for once. But yeah, we'll see how that pans out. And then another Netflix series that I've watched this week, Tiger King, which has just come out, which is absolutely nuts. American, I suppose, zoo owners, Exotic Joe and other people like that who obviously keep tigers, and the series ends with him in jail for plotting the murder, I suppose you'd call it, of a conservationist, and it is just absolutely balmy. I don't want to ruin too much if people haven't seen it yet, because it's quite new, but anyone who needs, I wouldn't even say needs a laugh, but something to occupy themselves for a few hours, that is, I would recommend it just for seeing something completely balmy and taking your mind off what's going on in the outside world at the moment. So that is Tiger King. That was pretty wild. And then, back to TV, a couple of films that I hadn't seen before, quite old ones. The Bone Collector, which I watched
that's
this morning.
A good one.
That was a good one.
Bit of
I enjoyed
Denzel.
that. Yeah, a bit of Denzel. Big fan of his. And then Speed as well. Another a big fan of Sandra Bullock as well. So that was good. And then watched a couple of James Bond films as well, and a couple of favourites. So that was good. And then in terms of sort of new TV, I guess you'd call it, Friday Night Dinner was back on Friday evening, funnily enough, on Channel 4. So I think that was the 6th series. I think it's just started, and that is a good half an hour of giggles and whatnot on a Friday night, and that was a welcome return for that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of that series comes off.
Outstanding stuff. Well, we'll be hearing more of Tom Hiscott's Self-Isolation Nation on next week's Toolstation Western League podcast. Fantastic stuff, Tom. We'll now bring it back to the football, and we go back to our Toolstation Western League Chairman John Paul. Of course, listeners will remember that we spoke to John after last week's WebEx meeting between the Step 5 and 6 leagues and the Football Association, where they were discussing the future of our season. At the time, of course, we didn't think that a decision would be particularly quickly forthcoming because of so many competing interests across the pyramid. But they surprised us with their efficiency. And that's how I started my conversation with John. We wanted a decision, and by Thursday, we had one.
Well, I'm pleased to think that the proposal that we put forward was acceptable. They accepted that in finality on behalf of all the leagues. There were obviously other leagues that at that Tuesday meeting with the FA had different thoughts. The points per game was the most prominent. Fortunately, the leagues committee were of the opinion that aborting the season was the best option, and that's what was carried. We've had, to my knowledge, no objections from any of the clubs. No doubt there's clubs out there that are somewhat disappointed, and we understand all that. Probably the other plus was that when they actually sent out the document, that they'd also decided to abort the proposals for the pyramid, the lateral movement, such like. So there's probably more clubs that are not satisfied with the outcome than not, really, simply because that means that they've retained a further season in Western League membership. Probably the biggest disappointment was there's no indication as regards to what they intend doing with the FA balls and the FA trophy. From the brief conversations that I've had, they do appear to be looking to try to address that. So obviously in the case of Bitton, that is extremely important, and quite honest, I would have thought it would have been possible to be able to achieve something in that direction. In general, pleased with the proposal was accepted.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for Bitton, because by the sound of it, there is still a chance that their semi-final might well go ahead. But for the rest of the member clubs in the Western League, it's really as you were at the beginning of the 2019-20 season. All of those clubs will be in their respective divisions come the start of the new season, whenever that is.
That's it. Yes.
I know that when we spoke last week, we discussed the sort of the competing interests in football across the various levels of the pyramid, and I know at the time you were concerned that was causing the Football Association something of a headache in trying to reach the consensus that they were looking to achieve. So, are you surprised that actually the decision came out as early as Thursday of last week?
Yes, to be honest, yes. Certainly from the point of view that the National League were obviously the biggest problem that they had. They try to adopt this cohesive approach, as they call it. In other words, they like to be able to treat everybody the same. Well, realistically, I don't think anybody ever believed that was likely to happen. It gets a bit deep, actually, and to be quite honest, with regards to 1 and 2 being part of the National League system, which, in my view, I just can't see how it can work, simply because you've got full-time clubs. I would believe they are more allied to the professional game than they ever would be to the non-league system. So when you start talking about decisions that need to be made, and you're including those, steps 1 and 2 into that equation, I can't see how you can actually look to include them in finality. I mean, the thing is, they've made decisions and they've excluded them, which I think probably says exactly that's where they sit in the National League system. I just don't see how you can include them in it. And the reason is very simple, is because they got contracted players. They got all the obligations that they had to fulfil with that. I was surprised that they managed to reach the conclusion as quickly as they did, which, from our point of view, was what we wanted.
Now, I know that when we spoke previously on this, some fans would have preferred that the season finish on a points per game basis, but when I look at the Toolstation Western League tables, we've completed about 2/3 of our season. We've got about 1/3 to go. So, as far as we were concerned, bearing in mind that other leagues, I suppose, will have played more matches than we will have done, is that the reason why it became impossible for you and your board members to consider that as a possible way forward?
Yes, it was without a doubt the major thinking behind it. The decision. Anybody that's got a view about points per game, I would suggest, are only thinking about their own situation. And I get that. I mean, if I was in a club, would I be disappointed? Most certainly I would. But the view that affected everybody was the view that we felt that the league should be aborted. So consequently, there were probably more winners in that than there were losers. To be honest, I didn't consider that it was a really difficult decision, because how could anybody... I mean, if you look at promotion, but let's look at relegation. How could you seriously relegate anybody out of a league when there was somewhere in the region of, 12, 14, 15, 16 games to play? It just made absolutely no sense at all. I don't think that we would have considered it was a particularly difficult situation. And I really can't understand, and everybody's going to have an opinion about it. And in fairness, other leagues obviously felt that would suit them. I mean, I think probably we were worse off than most with regards to numbers of games that needed to be played. But it didn't stack up for us to consider seriously points per game as being a solution.
Now, running a Western League club is obviously about much more than just 90 minutes of football we see on a match day. So do you feel that the decision that's been taken to void the season will be a genuine help for our member clubs, not least as this lockdown continues?
Hopefully. They got clarity. So they know where they're going now. There's a bit of an irony, really, in as much that we talk about close seasons getting shorter and shorter by the year. Here we are now, probably in a position where we could have quite considerable time without football. So consequently, you start thinking then about, there's an opportunity to go on maintenance, grounds and such like. The trouble is, with a lot of these jobs that need to be undertaken, they all come at a cost. And when you've got a clubhouse that it's almost, a difficult one to be able to, to get your head around. I mean, like I say, I think that most people will be satisfied with the fact that they got a decision, whereas before we were just we're just hanging around, not really knowing what was going to happen. And whatever solution they reached, whether it was points per game, it wouldn't have really changed a lot any more than obviously the promoted clubs and the relegated clubs would have been gone. But like I referenced before, how they'd have got over the lateral movement situation, God knows. I mean, I think one of the big concerns, to be quite honest, really, is that we talk about football, but to me, getting clubhouses open is probably the most important thing, because if we can't do that, then the revenue streams are going to take a real hit.
I know that you were very keen on a decision being made when we spoke last time, because you said as far as you and the league were concerned, that was going to very much inform your strategy going forward as to how you can support the clubs. Where does that leave you at the moment?
Well, it's put us in a better position to be able to implement what we wanted to. I mean, we talked at this at great length, really, about what exactly we could do, and it was always going to hinge very much around financial support. So we've been in a position now. We always make mention, quite rightly so, of the generous support we get from Toolstation, and this has really come home now, to benefit everybody to the degree that we've been able to put in place what we termed as an emergency fund. So we pushed out a lump sum, and we backed that up by an interest-free loan scheme. The advice is there from the FA with regards to those that employ, to look at all the government grant funding that's available, business rates, holidays and things like that. So, yeah, it's put us in a position by having that decision to be able to promote, this scheme in the way that we have, really, and we're always available to try to support. I mean, that's what we're about, and we're as much into this as the clubs are, really. We can only keep looking at it on a day-to-day basis to just see what more we can do, to be honest.
Now, one final question for you, John. I know when we last spoke, we had a discussion about the Think of a Fan campaign that the league have been running, and I mean, I keep a track of what people talk about in terms of the Western League family on social media, and it's been quite heartwarming to see some of the examples of support that our clubs have been doing. I mean, from a league's perspective, what have you been seeing across the member clubs?
No, it's just to pieces with it. I mean, apart from the Think of a Fan, I mean, you've got to congratulate the Westburys, Tavistocks, Keynshams, Bucklands, who've all taken on their own initiatives, really, and that's just clubs I know of. I mean, no doubt there's numerous others that have helped out one way in the community, and yeah, I mean, I think it's incredible to think that so many people have really sort of bought into showing concern. Football sort of tells a little bit, doesn't it, when you get into what we're into at the moment, and it's just, it's perhaps a bit easier when you're part of an organisation to be able to promote something, but as we do, I think all our clubs have been tremendous, to be quite honest.
John, thanks again for your time. Thanks for coming back to us. Perhaps as this situation develops going forward, we'll come back to you when we know a bit more about when we're going to be starting to play football again. But I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us on the podcast, and please stay safe.
Another job, another saving. Brought to you by Toolstation.
Is this all the receipts?
Yes, boss.
For everything we got from Toolstation?
Yeah, why?
I just thought we'd spend a lot more than this.
Oh, no. We got all the best brands too. Makita, Santex, Karcher, Nest.
Top job, top saving.
With over 15,000 trade-quality products at prices that are hard to beat, we're here to save you on every job. At Toolstation.com and all 340 branches.
Now, moving on to our second interview of this week's podcast, and I'm delighted to welcome a new person to the Western League podcast. It was Greg Coulson, the manager of Westbury United. Now, of course, regular listeners will know that we hear over the years we've heard quite a lot from Neil Kirkpatrick, the joint manager at Westbury. But on this occasion, I wanted to have a chat with Greg. There's a very good reason for that, which will become apparent towards the end of the interview. But I started off the conversation by asking him how he felt about the FA's decision to void the season.
It was good sound leadership from the FA. I mean, no one wants to see the season ended early or things like that. But when you look at the wider things that are going on in the world, we've kind of just got to let football take the backward step, and we could have dragged this on, no one making a decision and everyone being left up in the air. I think the clear direction from the top lets us now start planning for next season.
I mean, did you feel any differently at the time the announcement was made? I mean, there are some clubs that have quite openly said that they wanted the season to continue, or perhaps they wanted the league to finish on a points per game basis.
Yeah, we're in the unfortunate position of pretty much just being sat mid-table, so we haven't really got anything left to play for. So it was quite easy from our point of view, from an emotional type of decision. It was more about getting that final decision that this season is over, so we could start planning for the pitch renovations and see what we have to do with the clubhouse now that we've had to shut down for the summer. So yeah, I can understand there's teams that would want the points per game, but I think especially in our league, there wasn't enough games completed really by a lot of teams, so you couldn't go points per game unless you were 80% of the way through the season. I don't think it's fair on the competition.
When you look at it from your perspective as a club chairman, if I was to say, if we plan for a scenario, say, well, will we begin football at the beginning of May, or we begin football at the beginning of June, or we begin football at the beginning of July, if the FA had adopted that approach and sort of had started formulating scenarios perhaps about how the season could continue, how useful really would that have been from the perspective of you running a club? And, you know, I know that there are maintenance issues and pitch issues, you know, amongst other things, but I mean, you've got a much better grasp than I have of the sort of the full gambit of things that clubs really need to be thinking about at this time of the year.
Yeah, I think it's difficult putting anything at our level over the summer, because you've got half your team will be aware and half your volunteers will be aware. But I think the last thing we wanted, or anyone really wants at this level, is to be playing over the summer. If there's some way we could have got it finished before May, maybe the first week of May, then maybe we could have. But the only real window now you've got is starting to get in August and completing this season at what would be the beginning of next season. But from what it looks like, it doesn't even look like we're going to be playing before October. I was listening to the Sunday supplement the other day, and they seem to think that you're not going to be allowed to have any crowds until the middle of October. So, yeah, like I say, we've got no dog in the fight for continuing this season. So we kind of took it on the chin. The biggest disappointment is from a financial point of view. You lose quite a lot of money, or you don't get the opportunity to earn the money when you're not playing football. But if you're trying to compress the season into a short space of time, you can have a nightmare with player availability, the injuries to players, referees as well. You've got to think about trying to get teams to play 3 or 4 times a week. You've got to find referee coverage for that. You've got to get people to mark your pitch, wash your kit, work the gate, work the bar. I mean, you can do 1 week, you could probably do 2, but you start going into 3 or 4 weeks, I think most teams would agree that it'd break your volunteer workforce. And yeah, to get this season done would be a great idea, but I don't think many people will be volunteering next year to give you a hand.
What has the coronavirus crisis meant to Westbury? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, obviously financially, I mean, you've been hit. I mean, how are things looking for your club? It's
been a roller coaster, really. We basically that Friday when the Premier League and the Football League got called off, we went from lunchtime thinking, well, we need to plan for a big gate here. We're going to have a bumper Saturday. So when I got home, we were off as well. So it was a real roller coaster that Friday, and can totally understand why the decisions were made. But from a financial point of view, you're talking, I think we had like 6 home games left, which is including the big one for us, Good Friday against Bradford, and we also had Easter Monday against Coulson, which would have attracted a decent crowd. So there's two absolute bumpers there that we've missed out on and don't have the opportunity to earn that. You've got to now start thinking about the cost of the stock that you've got in the bar, because if that goes out of date, you've got to buy stock twice. So we've been basically trying to get rid of it at cost price, so it doesn't cost us double to restock the bar when we can finally start selling again. I'd say probably around about £10,000 is what we have had the opportunity to bring in as a club. Plus, when you start going into pre-season, it's our centenary year. We were planning some big celebration over the summer, but that's all on the back burner now. So you could probably double what we haven't had the opportunity to because of the coronavirus. But like I said, you've just got to be reactionary. As soon as the news broke, we started discussing the worst case scenario. We could be out not playing football till August, September, which looks like it could be October now. So we started, like I say, getting rid of the stock, shutting the bar down, turning off anything that's not essential, trying to keep our bills down. The water, the electric, everything's just been over there. It's just like everything's turned off and nothing's happening. We've just got to keep the pitch ticking over now and hopefully get some work done on that in the next few weeks so that we can take advantage of the ideal time is now, really, to get your grass growing. So that's one silver lining of this terrible situation.
I mean, you've talked about an eye-watering amount of money there. I mean, we obviously every day we see the government announcing support for businesses, and rightly so. But in terms of, the support that perhaps your football club could use at this particular moment in time, I mean, is there anything that can make a difference for you at the moment?
I think we just need flexibility from the utility companies. That's the big outgoing that you just can't stop. You've got to keep certain bits of electric on. There's going to be, like, the urinals constantly pump water through, so you're going to have a water bill and you're going to have electric bills. I think I was trying to work with Eon, and I was trying to get in touch with them, and they just keep throwing, because of the coronavirus, we can't talk to you. And it's like, well, I'm just asking if we can reduce our bill down as small as we can for the next few months until we can start earning again. And that's a real difficulty. I think if you're a real business, you'd be able to force that, but where we're a volunteer organisation, not for profit, you kind of just get chucked on the back burner. The problem is you get 2 or 3 months of £300-400 electric bills. The money's not coming in, so we need to kind of trust that the banks and the utility companies are going to do what they say they're going to do. If you're late with your payments, they're not going to fine you, and you can catch up. That's the biggest worry, that we're going to get there, and it's going to be a spiral for clubs will get through this, and then you'll be spiralling with fines and in this ever chasing that, trying to get yourself back on an even keel again. So that's probably my biggest worry at the moment from a club point of view. I mean, we're not worried about what we think we're going to use. It's about what we think we're not going to earn, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's obviously the question about the help that, you might want. But, I mean, on the subject of help, I've been quite inspired by the generosity and the commitment that your club has shown to your local community. Can you just talk the listeners through who might not be familiar with what you're doing, but you've been using the food, haven't you, that you would have been producing on a match day, and you've been distributing that to needy people in your area?
We want to take this opportunity, really, to demonstrate that we're more than just a football club, that we're part of our local community. And whilst we've got fit and healthy volunteers, we want to continue to offer our services. So we're continuing on a Saturday to cook the same amount of food that we would for the players if we were hosting a match. And we're offering it out to anyone in the local area, and also key workers, NHS staff. Anyone who wants a hot meal on a Saturday evening, we'll deliver it to you. So we've only really had a couple of takers so far, but I think we're quite early in this. As long as we're all fit and healthy, we've got players on standby who are willing to deliver food. Myself and my wife are willing to cook it, and we're just happy to help anyone in the local area on a Saturday. If anyone wants a hot meal or wants something they can pop in the fridge and microwave the next day, if you're a key worker, then we'll deliver you. We'll deliver several meals. If someone's happy to eat a chili con carne for the next 3 days, they're quite welcome to have 3 pots. If it's people who are out there working, or people who are isolated and worried about getting themselves a decent meal, And I'm not too bad at cooking, so it's all right, I hope.
Greg, thanks ever such a lot for taking the time to speak to us. It's really an inspiring story at what you're doing at the club. I'm sure that there are many things going on at our clubs that we don't have the time necessarily or the opportunity to cover. But I saw that on social media you were making this offer, so it's lovely to hear that even at a time of crisis, there are some really positive, good news stories coming out of the Western League and Westbury in particular.
Oh, thanks, Ian. That means a lot. Obviously, it extends to clubs in our area as well. If we've got, let's say, Warminster are struck down by the virus, we're happy to go over there and give them a hand. And if they need grounds work doing and stuff like that, we've got a lot of fit young men who need to be run around. If someone needs a hand, we're more than happy to give a hand where we can. If teams are struggling, and obviously finance we can't, but if you just need some people to go and bloody plant a few bits of seed when we're allowed to gather again, we're more than happy to try that. We're all in this together. It's a football family. We're all in it together off the pitch. It's on the pitch we compete, and we're not allowed to do that at the moment, so we've all got to be friends at the moment.
And my thanks to Greg for his time. Now, just before we go, we did have a conversation on last week's podcast, Tom, about the fact that you were now catching up on a few films that you were very you were long overdue that you watched, and so on this is a section that I'm calling Film 2020 with Tom Hiscott. I think we're going to have a little bit of a sporting feel for this section, just to bring it back to sport. So, did you watch any sporting films over the last week?
I did, yeah. It was kind of another sort of documentary. Those are the sort of things I quite like. So it was a thing on Diego Maradona, and yeah, it was on Channel 4 actually. So I think it's still available for everyone if they needed to catch up. But I'd recommend it. So it was by the same director who did something on Ayrton Senna a couple of years ago that was really highly acclaimed. So I thought I'd check it out. Obviously, it's all in you do have to pay attention, unfortunately, because there's not much of it in English, so reading subtitles and whatnot to get a gist of what's going on. But it looks back at his time in Napoli mostly, where obviously that sort of spell, he obviously had a certain moment against England, which is quite memorable in a World Cup, so it covered that, and the fallout of Italia 90 as well, where he went from obviously being very popular in Italy for his play in their league to becoming a bit of a villain. So it was a really good look back, and it had him his comments, and so it wasn't just about him, it was with Maradona doing bits as well. So that was really good. As I say, that should be available on catch up on I can't remember what the Channel 4 player is called, but so if people have got a spare couple of hours, I would highly recommend that.
Now, I'm far be it from me to start suggesting that anybody watches anything on television, because my life is filled with MasterChef and Peppa Pig. But if I may be so bold as to recommend, just for anybody who hasn't seen it, I do enjoy watching. I do enjoy watching boxing films, and although the go-to boxing films, of course, will be the Rocky set of films, I would recommend Cinderella Man. Not least because I'm a big fan of Russell Crowe, but actually it's a very well put together film that covers a lot more than just boxing, and it occurs at a time in America during the Depression, and so the backdrop to the rise of James J. Braddock is one that perhaps feels pertinent to the time that we're in at the moment, and the fact that sport, albeit in a small way, can play an important part of the way that communities come together and get over difficult times like the one we're facing. Anyway, that's my recommendation. Tom, it's been great catching up with you.
You too.
On the podcast. I think if you're willing, we'll keep this going for a while longer. We were, of course, scheduled to finish on April the 25th. That was going to be the end of our season, and probably you and I would have gone on another week after that to cover off the Les Phillips Cup We'll certainly keep going for a few weeks yet, and hopefully, if we're providing the listeners with some entertainment in these difficult times, then we might even keep going a bit longer than that. I'm certainly looking forward to next week's episode of Tom Hiscott's Self-Isolation Nation.
So am I.
Of course, if anybody out there can think of a better title for it, or indeed Film 2020 with Tom Hiscott, then please let us know. But from me, Ian Knockholds, and from Tom, you've been listening to the Toolstation Western League podcast.